everyone that is watching or listening. Welcome to another episode of Drum for the Song podcast. I am honored to welcome you to my special guest, Mr. Lucas Fox. How are you doing, Mr. Fox?
I'm extremely well, Dane. It's really good to see you again. Haven't seen you for a couple of years now.
Yeah,
we met up on a boat.
Yeah, the boat, the Parisian boat. I don't know if it was a Parisian boat.
It was,
but it was a cool venue.
It was a great gig as well.
Thank you.
Really a storming gig.
I remember it fondly, actually. You know, a lot of gigs do blur into one another, and it is hard to distinguish them. But because of the venue itself, I do remember that very fondly. But I obviously remember meeting yourself after the show as well, which was a nice surprise. But yeah, how is life? You live in Paris itself, or just outside?
Yeah, I live in Paris, man, and have done for 37 years.
Wow.
Believe it or not. It was just a work thing that I got offered work in the south of France, so I started working, running shows in the world's biggest music convention, which was a surprise. It's the first time I've ever done that. But I ended up programming James Brown and Al Jarreau, Campbell, and all sorts of people. I had a lot of fun.
Wow.
It was a big show. It was 7 live bands in an hour and a half, going out to 15 countries live. So it was really risky, and I love risk.
I can imagine. Yeah, wow, that is incredible. So, like, what? Obviously, apart from I know your brief history. Well, I briefly know your history as obviously a drummer and a songwriter, and some of the I've been doing my research the last few days because
nice one.
We only really arranged this 2 days ago, everybody. So I've kind of been revising and cramming a lot of reading and listening because normally I give myself a good week to do all that, and I've crammed it into 2 days.
Well done.
So yeah, I'm not going to pretend to know all the facts because I definitely do not, but I think I've got a good idea. But so how did you get into that job specifically then? From playing in punk bands, rock bands.
It was one of those things where I got taken out on the road by a mate of mine, a sound engineer who was Iggy Pop's sound engineer, and been my sound engineer for a long time. And he took me out on the road to teach me how to do backline roadie, which was great. And I hadn't done any of that before. I'd always been drummer in bands and writer in bands and stuff. And so he took me out for 6 weeks and trained me up as a backline roadie, which was great, which meant I could deal with technicians, which was no problem at all, as well as musicians and, booking my own bands and organising gigs and all that stuff I've been doing for years anyway. And it just came up that someone called me out of the blue and said, listen, would you be interested in running shows in the south of France? And I sort of went, how much does it pay? They said, hey, don't worry, you'll be well looked after. I went, oh, fuck it, yeah, let's go for it. So I went for it and did it for 3 years. That was cool. But it was a kind of an add-on to it. I mean, I was already producing bands, had been for years as well, producing bands all over the place and working with, I don't know, Sisters of Mercy and people like that, Sisterhood. So stuff like that. So I've been producing bands for a while. So suddenly this came on as an add-on. And I thought, well, this could be good because most of the bands I was producing, it was tiny budgets, which I loved as well because it's indie bands, bands where you got a lot of freedom and very little time to record. But it was I loved it. It was great stuff. And I did that in Yugoslavia. I did it in Vienna, in Austria, and loads of albums for France as well, and a few for Britain. So it came in as an add-on. And like most of my life, it's been a haphazard affair, which I didn't really plan. I mean, I started drumming at the age of 9. I became obsessed by drums, I think because there was a piano at my grandparents' place in the country, and I started tinkering away on that. My grandmother saw that and immediately stuck sheet music in front of me and said, "You've got to learn this." And looking at sheet music at the age of 9, it was like, or even 7, I think it was 7 or 8, and I hated it. And it became like little ants crawling off the page. It didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And she started hitting me with a ruler when I got it wrong. And I looked at the ruler and I thought, "Fuck this! I'm not going to learn this sheet music stuff." But the ruler kind of got something. So I started hitting on pots of pans with bits of stick and stuff. And that's really where it started. And then we moved to Chiswick, Chiswick, which is just in the suburbs of London. In those days, it was way out in the suburbs. Of course, now it's central London.
Right.
And basically, I plagued my parents to have a drum kit for it went on for 2 months or something. And Christmas came and went, nothing happened. And I continued to hanging little signs all over the house saying, I must have a drum kit. I need a drum kit. My life depends on a drum kit. And finally, they advanced my birthday by 2 days, from Monday to Saturday. They just had enough and sort of get it out of the way. And they gave me a snare drum with a stand and a tiny splash single. And that was it. And I was overjoyed to have a snare drum, a sort of second-hand snare drum. We hadn't got much money at the time. And I went up to see my father still in bed and said, look, thanks very much for the snare drum. What do I do about the rest? And he just looked at me like despair on his face and said, well, if you're really serious, you'll find a way. So I was in my pajamas and dragged on a pair of trousers and a woolly jumper and coat and woolly hat and stuff, and put on some Wellington boots and went out in the snow to clear snow off cars all the way down the road and seeing, banging on the door, I need to wash your car, I need to buy a drum kit, And that's how it started. And after about 4 or 5 cars, I had enough money in little pennies to buy my first real pair of drumsticks. And so I then went to my mum and said, listen, we've got to go to the drum shop. We've got to buy myself a pair of drumsticks to go with the snare drum. She took me off down to the drum shop, and we walked in, and this is in 62, 63, right? It's the worst winter we'd had since the war. Wow. Snow on the ground and stuff. We walked into, I think it was King Street Music Stores, and it's just up the road from Hammersmith Odeon, which everybody knows Hammersmith Odeon, and Chiswick was just down the road. And we walked into the drum shop with a sort of, had a little bell on the door, a tinkle, tinkle. And we walked in, and me as a 9-year-old, so I lined my pennies on the counter to ask for a pair of drumsticks. And I remember the last client I'd had said, he'd been in the RAF, in an RAF band as a drummer. He said, listen, lad, when you buy sticks, you must roll them down the counter to make sure they're straight, right? So I did it without really thinking about why, and you know why, right? Yeah. Nothing worse than a warped drumstick. And there were 2 guys in the drum shop with us. And my mother gave me a dig in the ribs with her elbow and sort of looked left and right. There's a guy to my right who had sort of what seemed to be long dark hair and a big nose, and on my left was another guy who was completely ageless. And it turned out the guy who was ageless said, "There's another lad on the road to ruin," right? And turned out it was Charlie Watts from Ringo Starr.
What?
So it's just like I kind of, fate was already dealing a side of a set of cards which were beyond me, and it all kind of started then. And then I was drumming my life. I washed hundreds of cars in the next 2 or 3 years to buy my drum kits, tom by tom, it couldn't even mismatch, wrong colours and all the rest of it, and first cymbals and all the rest of it. And that's how it started, really. And then I was drumming through my teenage years. And in the teenage years, I was lucky enough, concert tickets and records were very cheap in those days. You have no idea now in comparison, but it was... even with pocket money, you could buy 2 singles a week. And me and my sister, who was 20 months older than me, we bought singles and an album a month or something and built up a record collection. But also concert tickets were cheap. So we used to go to concerts at Hammersmith Odeon. I saw, the Beatles there in 64 when I was 11, the screaming of the crowds, I can still remember it now. And of course, I was 11 and stuff. And then the Stones, like Tina Turner, Chuck Berry, all the blues bands, Stax, Otis Redding, all that stuff. Saw them at the age of 11, 12, 13, 14, whatever. And started going to the Marquee at 14 because I was the same height as I am now. And I never had a baby face. You can see I got one of those faces which was never a baby face when I was, apart from being a baby. And so I got into the Marquee, no problem. And in those days, they weren't sort of checking your ID on it. And so I saw everybody there, and sort of everybody from I don't know, Faces to Led Zeppelin in front of 450 people.
Incredible.
So it was kind of. But again, you see, I mean, when you're a kid, you assume all of this is normal. And you don't think, I mean, I remember the 50s because I was born in 53. So I can remember the 50s, and the 50s were in black and white, right? Or sepia,
Yeah.
like in films. But as soon as the 60s hit, it burst of color. And it was the biggest creative explosion you can imagine, whether it be in music, obviously, shitloads of bands, whether it be in fashion, in photography, in film, pop art, uh, anti-Vietnam War, anti-nuclear, everything was kicking off. And so much of it was happening in a particular district in London called Notting Hill Gate, which now is very posh. But in those days, it was one of the poorest districts probably in London, certainly in Britain.
Oh, really? Okay.
And yeah, and I ended when we moved back to London from London from Chiswick to central London. We were just down the road in Queensway. So so it was strange because going to Notting Hill Gate in those days, Portobello Road and stuff, it was full of hippies. It was I mean, the Jamaican Frontline was there. Bob Marley recorded Exodus there. There was Virgin Records in Portobello Road. There was Island Records in Portobello Road. For those who don't know, Virgin Records also signed the Sex Pistols and the Stones and all that stuff. Island Records had, a great roster of bands, and later on Eddie and the Hot Rods, and but of course they had Bob Marley and stuff. So it was just that thing of when we were in Chiswick, we used to see the Stones or parts of the Stones and the Who in the street, was wandering down the street. This was normal. So it wasn't. It was that thing of I never really thought about these famous people as being famous in some way. I never became what most people would call a fan, which is the shortened version of fanatic. I was just obsessed by music and obsessed by drumming, like obviously you were. So it's a strange one. And then if you want to pick on a little bit, sort of fast forward a little bit, I started. I went to art school for 6 months, and that was the great excuse because you get a bursary or whatever to pay for you at art school. So at least had a little bit of dosh and could live. And there I actually did calligraphy. It was a very old-fashioned art school. I wasn't good enough to get into a big art school. My marks at school weren't good enough. So it was a very basic, old-fashioned art school doing, I don't know, life drawing, nude life drawing, sculpture, modeling, calligraphy, all these etching, all really old-fashioned crafts, which was fascinating.
I can
It
imagine,
was really fascinating. Because if you like, I had the three obsessions. I don't know about you. I loved drawing and painting. As soon as the film came on the telly when I was a kid, I'd immediately grab a sheet and become Lawrence Arabia in the garden, or put on a tin hat and become a guy in D-Day and stuff. It's just. And the third one was music and drumming. So it was like before I even started, I knew I was sort of in trouble financially.
Well, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's these three professions were not things that you're going to be earn any money. And either way, honestly, money really wasn't my thing. I've never really been into that. It's really been just a whole life of bumbling along and loving what I'm doing. Passion. I always live with passion.
Yeah.
And I've still got that kid's passion in me. I mean, you probably remember. I'm not just passionate about things, and things I'm not passionate about just don't interest me at all. So a little bit further forward down the line, I realised I wasn't really breaking through in the early bands. I was doing. I don't know if you remember Melody Maker. In the back pages of Melody Maker, there was always adverts for looking for a drummer, looking for a guitarist, looking for a singer, and all this stuff. And so I used to go to these auditions. And 9 times out of 10, I didn't get the auditions I wanted to get, but I got all the auditions I didn't want.
Right.
So it's like, and I thought, there's something wrong here. It's obviously me. And it was nerves, And so I just decided that I was going to reply to every single ad I could, and went for all the auditions for like 3 or 4 months and broke the spell, and started getting gigs that I wanted to have. And so started being in professional bands, and but not really breaking through. I couldn't really work it out. These are small bands, unknown bands and stuff. And I saw a few big bands that were in forming at the time as well that I didn't get the auditions for. But I could see what was going on, and I obviously needed to educate myself a bit more about what was going on. And so I just, in the Melody Maker, New Musical Express, and Sounds, and all these papers that I bought religiously, in the interviews and stuff, and in the news items, it was always, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards at the Speakeasy, Keith Moon at the Speakeasy, Pete Townsend at the Speakeasy, Robert Plant at the Speakeasy. I just thought, I've got to get into the Speakeasy. So, as usual, bold as brass, with probably because out of complete denial, I just refused to let things get to me. I decided I'd go to the Speakeasy and see if I could get in. And sure enough, I just walked in and said, they said, "How old are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm 21." Of course I am. Yeah, I was 17.
17,
and,
right.
and they believed it and gave me a membership card. So for the next few years, I literally spent 2 or 3 nights there a week, drinking 1/2 a bitter, because that's all I really had money for. And it went warm and stuff. I was sipping it and watching what was going on around me. And sure enough, there were all these stars, and Keith Moon standing on a table, swigging a bottle of cognac, drunk out of his mind with Oliver Reed and people. And I started understanding that the language had changed. It was like, now people say it's sick, right? Which means it's good. And in those days, bad meant good, So there was a whole new language, which was also based a little bit on American language, American slang. So I had a new language to learn, in essence. Also, just beginning to understand people out of their brains on drugs and drinking and stuff. And so I started to understand it and be able to feel at home with all this. And therefore, at the age of 20, one of the bands I was in got produced by Pink Floyd, Nick Mason and Roger Waters. So that was also a massive step forward, to suddenly be in Nick Mason's studio recording an album with these two guys who, it was the week that Dark Side of the Moon went to #1 in the States, or top 10 in the States. They became millionaires that week. So it was and so I was beginning to get a drift of what was going on, and starting to really get into, okay, this can happen, because things are beginning to fall into place. And so I kept going to the Speakeasy, and sure enough, when I was 21, a year later, I was at the Speakeasy, and my girlfriend, we'd been hanging out together like soul sister and soul brother for maybe 18 months, 2 years of stuff before that. Motorcycle Irene introduced me to a guy called Lemmy.
Ah, there you go. That's where it all started then.
And that's where it all kicked off for Motörhead. And Lemmy was still in Hawkwind. I was 21, he was 28. So massive age difference. But as soon as we started talking, so what do you like in music, Lou? And I sort of said, in my back of my mind, I was going, he's obviously going to like progressive rock, because Hawkwind was progressive rock, space rock, but nonetheless progressive rock. And I, just as usual, bold as brass, said, well, I like all the R&B bands, British bands of the early 60s, them and the English Birds with Ronnie Wood, and started trotting it. And suddenly we're in a ping pong match, like literally going to and fro with all these bands and songs in particular, leaving here from the Birds. And all of this started really gelling between us. So we started talking about the Second World War. We got into that, and sense of humor, Monty Python, and he cracked a Tommy Cooper joke, and we were just like gelling. And the Speakeasy started to close, and he said, okay, we got to go. How are you getting home, Lou? And I said, well, I got my car. And his eyes lit up with a sort of gleam. And off we went to get in my car. And as soon as we walked up to my car, he just said, is that your car? And I had this, it was called a Renault 4 van. It was like this little white van, which we used to call the fridge, because it had really rudimentary heating and no lining at all. And so it heated from the front. You got cold at the back. You really froze your balls off in winter. So it's called the fridge.
Right.
And I said, yes, it is. But the advantage of this is we never get stopped. Because I used to borrow posh cars before that from various friends who had posh cars. and always got stopped with me long hair, you know. And I said, he said, well, why is that? And I said, well, there's always a plumber or a baker or an electrician who's driving around 24 hours a day in exactly these sorts of vans. Of course, for me, it was perfect because I could fit the drum kit in the back of the little van, and I put the black rubber drum mat over it. And so you couldn't see the drums from the outside. So it was a really good van. And it was my workhorse. And so off we went, and sure enough, I saw in the wing mirror, in the mirror, I saw a police car coming up behind us. So I turned down the 8-track cassette cartridge, told Lemmy to pull his elbow in, and sure enough, the police car cruised by without even giving us a second look. Whereas they would have stopped us if they saw Lemmy's hair and my hair. That was it. You know, we'd have been up for it.
Yeah, yeah.
And sure enough, so we went back into Portobello Road, and we were living in the same area, so that was easy as well. And the next day, that was the first night we spent together, up most of the night, and then from then on, this was in August '74, and then from then on, when he wasn't on tour in the studio, when I wasn't on tour in the studio, we just hung out together. I was really useful. I had a car, much cheaper than a taxi.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And also, you were fun to be around as well. Obviously, wasn't only that, and yeah, common interests. But obviously, I'm sure he called you a lot.
Yeah, and he taught me a lot. You know, he became the uncle that everyone would have wished to have had, and of course, cracking sense of humour, which I had too, and laughing at the same stuff.
Yeah.
And but also, I was educated not to be a macho guy, so I wasn't the guy who was always going to go, oh, but you know, and needling him, you know, like men do to each other all the time. They keep needling each other. And Lem was a real loner, and so when he was on his own, he didn't want all that shit. So we were a bit like an old couple, you know. We could really sit happily in the same room and not speak for an hour, and he'd be reading and I'd be drawing or whatever. And it became a very easy relationship between us. And that went on all the way through all sorts of stuff, which you'll have to read the book when it finally comes out in England. And I'm looking for a publisher at the moment. I've got a French publisher, which, you know, it's been incredibly well received. I mean, I'm unreal. It's strange because it was the last time I saw Lemmy that it started, because I'll sort of do a quick switch there. The last time I saw Lemmy was in 2014 when he came to the Zenith and played the Zenith in Paris. Okay. And I had a backstage pass, and we spent 2.5 hours together with with Tim, his bass tech, just the three of us, and it was just like the beginning I'm talking about. You know, we were back into that same frame of mind until we finally got kicked out. And I came back here after having seen him, and I hadn't seen him for 10, 15 years because he moved to LA in 1990, and I moved to France in 1988. We'd seen each other after Motörhead all the time, and he used to even go around the pubs to make sure he could fill up the gigs that I was playing.
Wow!
So it's a really nice, close relationship.
It's lovely, yeah.
You know, so it was this rather strange relationship because Lem came from up north, and I was from, I suppose, what might be considered a posh family, although my father was born in absolute destitution and his father died of TB, the poor man's disease and stuff. My mother was a kind of aristocrat with not a penny, you know, always a church mouse, they used to say. So it was a strange mix, but it worked, you know. And of course, Lem accepted everybody, he just didn't suffer fools. You know, he couldn't put up with people who'd drive him mad. He'd just, you know, Lem, you know, he just slammed the door.
Yeah, tell him straight, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, you know, it was like see you soon, not if I see you first, you know.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think a lot of people appreciated that side of him. And you know, like even though I knew him to some degree, obviously not in the same way that you did. I think whenever I met Lemmy, it was kind of like, oh, Phil's family is here. Everyone be on our best behavior and stuff like that. But yeah, he was always very polite, you know, to me and the family and stuff like that. But
he was very well brought up by his mother.
Yeah.
His mother brought him up with really good manners.
Yeah, you can tell.
I mean, he really was, and I was too. And both of us had a lot of women in our lives as family and stuff, and therefore there was that as well. He also rode horses, which I did as well.
Oh, I didn't know he did that.
Oh yeah. He was very into horses.
Oh wow!
When he was a nipper, he was actually worked at the stables and stuff. So we had an awful lot in common, and of course, Second World War, which I was obsessed by because my mother ended up being on a base called Tempsford. For anybody who knows their history, it was the base that sent all the SOE agents, all the resistance agents to Europe, and particularly to France. And my aunt was at Bletchley Park doing Enigma with Alan Turing, breaking the German Nazi codes on the Enigma machine.
Wow.
My uncle turned out to be I only found this out later. My uncle turned out to be one of the heads of the radar for the south of England. And my uncle was a spy who was my mother's elder brother. So it all kind of, I became obsessed by the Second World War because I'd heard so much about it. And he had, I had a different look at Second World War because I could remember my mother saying in 40, well, we knew we were going to lose. We couldn't see how we could possibly win. All our troops were all over the world trying to defend an empire that was already bankrupt. So when we saw what happened, to the whole of Europe being invaded, and suddenly, UK is stuck in its own, a bit like UK at the moment with Brexit.
Don't get us started on that. Yeah,
exactly. Don't get me started. Yeah. But yeah, so it was lots of stuff that we had easy conversations constantly. It was an easy one. And then, of course, if we rewind to back in 74, early 75, we'd been hanging out together and spending a lot of time up all night. Of course, Lem being Lem, doing a lot of speed.
Yeah.
And staying up 2 or 3 nights in a row together. And of course, I hadn't been really into speed up until then. So that's when I really got into speed, so to speak. And then he got kicked out of Hawkwind, and Doug Smith, the manager, called me up and said, would you mind picking up Lem from the airport? And I said, why? He said, you'll find out. And so I went to Heathrow Airport and picked up Lem, who refused to talk about anything, was like in a really foul mood. And on the way back from Heathrow in the traffic, because traffic was coming into London at that time in the morning, and finally he started opening up and said, told me about what had happened with Hawkwind and stuff, that he'd been kicked out, and he was saying it's the wrong kind of drugs. And of course, it wasn't just that. It was, of course, the fact that he'd, by accident, ended up singing Silver Machine, and it was really by accident because nobody else in the band could sing it.
Yeah.
And he became the star of the band because it was a hit. It got to number 3 in the charts and stuff. And overnight, Hawkwind suddenly became, instead of doing free gigs all over Britain and Europe, suddenly they were playing gigs. And suddenly he was the star of the band because all the journalists wanted to interview him because he was the guy who was singing Silver Machine. And the girls started being more interested in Lem than anybody else in the band. And so the jealousies within the band would also that. Plus, of course, Hawkwind were taking acid and smoking dope all day, and Lem was up all night on speed. And of course, if you're up all night on speed for 3 days, when you finally collapse, you are comatose, and we couldn't wake him up. And so regularly, Doug would call me up and say, well, where's Lem? And I sort of said, well, I dropped him off in Portobello Road. I don't know how many nights he'd been up, but I've been up 2 with him. And so I've no idea where he is. He's wandering up Portobello Road towards the north. I don't know where he ended up staying the night. He's crashed out somewhere, which, of course, regularly was also when he was meant to be at rehearsal or be on the bus. So it wasn't just the wrong kind of drugs.
Yeah, no.
So these are, Lem in those days wasn't the Lem that we all got to know later. It was also Lem, well, why did he get called Lem? It was true. Lemmy a quid till Friday, because Friday was payday. So he became called Lemmy because in the Rocking Vickers, how he joined the Rocking Vickers was that he had nowhere to sleep in Birmingham, and he ended up meeting up with the Rocking Vickers in Barrett's, the music shop, and by accident, one guy spotted him as a guy with very long hair, strumming away on an acoustic guitar, and sat next to him, and they strummed together and started hitting it off. And it turned out to be the guitarist of one of the Rocking Vickers guitarists. So that's how then he went along to the gig and became a roadie for the Rocking Vickers for a while, until finally the two of the guitarists left the band, and instead of cancelling the gig, Lemmy insisted that he knew all the chords, he could do it himself, which worked.
Yeah.
And that's his first serious band, after the Motown sect, which was a soul band. So all of these things start to fall into place. But of course, that was Lem in the early days was a Lem without any real money, and even in Hawkwind, where he had real royalties coming in, he still spent most of his money either going up his nose or on one-armed bandits, which was already his obsession.
Already by that point, wow, yeah.
Oh yeah. So it's a different angle on Lem. I mean, I loved Lem. I still always will. Massive massive admiration for a guy who taught me so much. But of course, he didn't become the god he became. He wasn't already. It took a while. And I think it was really when he moved to the States that he started being able to relax. And because he had enough money coming in and was on the road enough, because he loved being on the road, even in Hawkwind and stuff. He loved being on the road.
Yeah, that's what he always said was his home, was on the road was his home, you know. You could tell that was that's where he felt most comfortable. And I think when he would go home, that's when he would kind of, I guess, did you call it boredom maybe for him? But then that was the way he would pass his time, would be going down the Rainbow on the Bandit or whatever, and until the next tour.
and of course making model kits of German aircraft and British aircraft and all that, which is something I did as well.
Right, okay,
and tanks and stuff. So, again, all of these things. I mean, for me it seems obvious, but to other people who hadn't got these same obsessions, I guess it wasn't.
Yeah, I think some people do still find, like, I'm always on social media, and since Lemmy's death especially, there's been lots of random things that pop up on my Facebook feed, for instance. And whenever there's something that involves his fascination with the World War II memorabilia, there's always a few people that are like, well, that's a bit odd, isn't it? You must be a Nazi. And then obviously he was completely opposite. There's a lot of people will defend him then. But yeah, people do find it odd. But from what I've heard and read, and what he said, he just thought he liked the fashion. From what I understood,
and hated the doctrine. He hated it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He hated racism.
Oh yeah.
I mean, his famous phrase of, I've never understood racists. How can you hate someone without even speaking to them?
Yeah.
How can you hate someone at 100 paces? Which, the love of his life, who died in a bath with a needle in her arm, was black. I mean, these are things that he told me all about. And he said to me one day, early on, in fact, he said, "You're not into heroin, are you?" I said, "No, no way. My idea of fun is not, chucking up in a loo all night. That's really not my." He said, "If I ever find you with a needle in your arm, I'll break it in your arm."
Yeah.
And that was Lem. But it's and again, we're in a situation completely different today where. Well, the Nazi thing, I mean, he was fascinated by the image, which undoubtedly was a very strong image. And it was part of the thing with the Rocking Vickers had dog collars like a vicar, right? Hence the Rocking Vickers. Then he was roadie for Hendrix. Well, I mean, roadie in inverted commas, because I mean, for the book, I interviewed something like 80 people for 2 years.
Wow.
Like literally every week, I'd be on the phone with people in San Francisco, with people in Finland. The barman of the Marquee, who remembered exactly when Lemmy and I came in wearing iron crosses.
Oh, right, okay.
And it shocked him, and he remembered it so well. I said, "Oh, tell me more." So I interviewed him for weeks and weeks of trying to get all the little stories out of him. And likewise with the son of the landlord of the Hennike's pub where we all hung out, And I interviewed him for 18 months or something. We became close mates and stuff.
Wow.
On Facebook, thank fuck for Facebook, although I hate the thing.
I know.
It's a real love-hate relationship. But I mean, Facebook, suddenly Steve Gilmore turned up, and he was Doug Smith, the manager's assistant. And he said, "Do you know I was at the first rehearsal for Motörhead?" And of course, I can remember rehearsing with Motörhead. We had 11 rehearsals. That was it.
That was it.
That was it.
Wow.
And out of those 11 rehearsals, we had one photo session, which took up pretty much the whole of a rehearsal, and an interview for Sounds, I think it was, Jeff Barton or someone. And so we only really had 9 rehearsals before we were thrown out on the road. And Doug Smith insisted that we had to go out on the road first. And the weird thing about it was when Lem came back after I picked him up from the airport. Sorry, I'm bouncing to and fro, but it'll make sense to me anyway. When he came back, he was so pissed off. I mean, really, he was so upset. I mean, he was a shipwreck, you know, with his sails in tatters. He really was. And he didn't want to see anybody apart from yours truly. So we hung out together. Even he rented a room off Motorcycle Irene at the time. And even Irene just couldn't take it anymore of his negativity. And I'm a very positive young lad. And finally, it just got right up my nose after he'd spent days and days just saying, "Those fucking bastards, those fucking bastards, those fucking bastards." Irene, before she left, she said, "Listen, why don't you start your own band, call it Bastard? You don't need those arseholes anymore, right?"
Yeah,
and that's where the name Bastard came from Irene, like a lot of these things. And so finally I got pissed off and said, "Listen, Lem, this is ridiculous. You know, you've got a great reputation. You got, you're known for Silver Machines. You got a fan base. You got everything you need, really. I'm a drummer. Okay, I'm not famous, but I've been in 5 bands professionally. And I've done loads of gigs and recording. Why don't we start a band?" He said, "Fuck off." You know, it never crossed his mind to have his own band.
That's insane.
It was just, he just didn't like the. I mean, if you look at Hawkwind or the Rocking Vickers, there was just so much mayhem in these bands that being a band leader and the lead singer of a band was something that he just found anathema from him. It was just like not possible in his brain. And finally, Doug Smith on one side was saying, "Listen, you're going to have to do something." He said, "Yeah, but get me back into Hawkwind. Get me back into Hawkwind. That's my band." And Doug Smith said, "You're not going to go back in." They've all refused. They said, "No, you're not going to get back in." After a while of this, and me on my side saying, "Listen, I'm a drummer. Let's start a band," and Irene on her side. So the 3 of us kind of together, without consulting each other, were having a go at Lemon. Finally, it became his idea, and he called me up and said, "Listen, we've got to meet me at the pub, the Carlton Bridge, which is the closest pub to the management office, which is on the canal there at Westbourne Park Road." And so I met him at the pub, and as often, he lit up 2 Marlboros, passed me one, and through a haze of smoke, he said, "Lucas, we are Motörhead. We're going to play rock and roll." And that's the first time he said it. Right.
Very cool. Very, very cool.
And at that moment, my brain went into overdrive. Oh, fuck, we've got a band. Here we go. This is it. And then, of course, the next question was, who we're going to have on guitar? We both looked at each other, went, Wayne Kramer.
So
of MC5.
Oh, right. Of course, yeah. Did you both know him? Was he available at the time, or what was
right? Mickey Farron, who was NME journalist and International Times journalist, a really independent journalist from New Musical Express, one of the main papers at the time.
Yeah,
knew Mickey, knew Wayne Kramer, and called up Wayne Kramer's management and stuff. 2 weeks before, he'd been put in the slammer for 3 years for too much cocaine.
Oh dear!
And I got hold of Wayne, and I got an email exchange with him where I say, "Do you remember?" He said, "Well, of course I don't remember. I was in jail." Right? So he doesn't remember being asked. He said, "I would have leapt on it. I would have been there."
Yeah, that would have been cool.
So that was so because Wayne wasn't available, we went for Larry Wallace of the Pink Fairies.
So yeah, like I'm not going to pretend I know all about that era because it was far before my time, obviously. But so obviously later on you ended up playing and songwriting with the Pink Fairies, but Larry Wallace was already in the Pink Fairies before he joined Motörhead, or had he left the band at that point, or did you kind of steal him?
It was a weird one. Pink Fairies and Hawkwind were kind of brother and sister bands,
right?
Both doing free gigs and stuff, and they even had Pink Wind occasionally, where you had like 4 drummers on stage, and
oh god,
like 100 musicians all playing at the same time, approximately.
So it was mayhem. The modern equivalent would be Muck Busted in the poppy rock world, anyway.
Exactly, and so. But Lemmy and Larry didn't really know each other that well at that time, although they were hanging out and sharing the same bill regularly. They weren't really close at all. And so Larry jumped on it and definitely wanted to be in the band. So that's when we had the rehearsals and stuff.
Nice.
And then we were thrown out onto the road for a 19-day tour, and it was literally going down the edge of a razor blade. Because of it was under rehearsed.
Yeah.
The songs we had were basically 2 or 3 Hawkwind songs and songs that had been sung in Hawkwind, plus obviously Motörhead, which became the name of the band.
Yeah.
Because bastard Doug Smith refused it because he knew that we'd never get on the BBC. We'd never get on BBC radio or TV with a name like Bastard.
Well, I know all about that.
Right, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
That was definitely when we discussed the name of our band. For anyone listening who doesn't know, Phil Campbell and the Bastard Sons. Obviously I didn't come up with that name, but I definitely said, look, this is going to become a problem with radio and merchandise, and like we've never really been on TV, so but maybe that's why. But it's definitely
could be.
It comes along with
deserve it. You definitely deserve the TV, man. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, Phil Campbell and the Bastard Sons, they're a fucking great band with great material, and seriously, it's well worth. So you've got to go and see the band. They're a great band.
Thank you very much. Obviously, it means a lot coming from yourself, and but yeah, it's like these days. It's because the way the industry has changed over to online and YouTube. All exposure now is all about, trending or, getting your views up on YouTube. Whereas even when I was younger, we had music channels that people used to watch on TV.
Yeah.
And that tended, if you had a hit on a music channel or MTV or something like that, or
that's it, you're off.
Yeah, that really helped. And I discovered lots of bands that way, but that doesn't really exist anymore. So
I know it's pathetic. I mean, frankly, if some bright spark were to come up with the equivalent of the Tube or Tiswas or even kids programs that had bands on which were really good, there were I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5. I guess all that's left is Jules Holland. That's about it. And likewise in most countries, but it's strange. Again, if you go back to the image thing, Rocking Vicars had therefore the dog collars and caused outrage at the time because being called a vicar was in a very straight society was outrageous, and that's why they called them the Rocking Vicars, because they needed outrage to be able to break through.
I guess that's that still applies today.
It still applies today,
being controversial and all that. But yeah, it's just the way you're discovered is very different. In some ways, obviously, you've got more tools at your disposal with the internet, but it's just you've got a lot of competition as well, all at the same time.
Well, there always was. There always was.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. You're right.
I mean, from that point of view, there always was. The difference was that you had to break through. Well, for a start, to get into a band, you had to go to all the gigs. You had to be at all the clubs, all the gigs, all the time. That was because there was no way of networking on internet because there wasn't any internet.
True. Yeah. Exactly.
That was the only way. You had to be in the right circles to get into bands. And reply to the right ads and all and be basically good enough to get in.
Yeah.
But this thing of outrage So the Rocking Vicars were one band, and the Rocking Vicars also supported the Who, and the Who were outrageous. The first punk band with the first punk single called "My Generation." I hope I die before I get old.
Yeah.
People I see seem awful cold. I hope I die before I get old. And then when he became Hendrix's roadie, he saw Hendrix on stage all the time for one tour, and that was, I mean, Hendrix was outrageous on stage, a really shy, well brought up kid off stage, really gentle and polite and all the rest. I mean, he used to stand up as soon as a woman walked in the room. It was any girl walked in the room, he'd stand up out of respect.
Wow.
But on stage, he was a panther with a cobra, inside him, and so that was also outrageous. I mean, that tour, the last gig of that tour, they were playing 2 gigs a night, and it was an amazing tour with Pink Floyd on it, and the Nice, and all Keith Emerson, all this, Amen Corner, who I know really well. I played with the bass player of Amen Corner just after Motörhead, and that tour was amazing. But on the last gig of the tour, the first gig of the night, I think it was in Scotland, I think it was in Glasgow. The manager thought that Hendrix was way too sex orientated, and they closed the curtains on him.
What?
And that was the end of the tour. He didn't even play the second gig.
Oh my God.
And again, I was at the Albert Hall, the first gig of that tour. Unbeknownst to me, there was Lemmy behind the speakers stopping them falling over. There we go again, this synchronicity thing.
Yeah.
And but so Lemmy learnt about outrage from Rocking Vicars, from Hendrix, and then from Hawkwind, where Silver Machine, if you look at the top of the Pops film of Silver Machine, Doug Smith was really clever manager, and he managed to convince the BBC to take an outside broadcast unit and film a gig of Hawkwind, and then stripe the song to it. And of course, it's all out of sync as usual. I hate it when you see things are out of sync. You must hate it as well.
Oh, I can't stand it.
I mean, and it happens so often. You see the drumstick come up, and that's when the snare drum hits.
Yeah,
that just drives me nuts. Anyway, so you know what I mean. And as soon as that thing starts, you can see you're in a gig. I think it was Dunstable, and outside London, and everybody is out their fucking boxes. That the audience is out their boxes, and everyone on the stage is obviously out their minds. And of course that created outrage. And suddenly Hawkwind had hundreds of thousands of fans all across Britain from the Top of the Pops show. Wow. So the outrage thing was also this using the Nazi thing as a provocation, which of course I don't. People often ask me, well, if you were being Motörhead now at the beginning, would you have used it now? And I said, no way, no way. But at the time, it was a completely different thing. I mean, Brian Jones was famous for wearing a full SS uniform for a thing, I think it was in Stern magazine.
All right, I didn't know
which
that.
was completely illegal in Germany. So again, outrage. Jimmy Page, the first time he played on American TV, was wearing a Panzer jacket. Jimmy Page also wore an SS cap on stage. This sort of outrage was something everybody did.
Yeah.
To break through, and it's something that people still have outrage to break through, with what they say on stage, etc., etc.
Yeah.
It's a way of getting press. It's a way of getting, press columns, and you it's just a way of breaking through.
It basically. Is, yeah. No, I get that. I get
that. So it's an interesting one. And then of course we're on tour, went all over the UK. But again, not being famous enough, they couldn't book the tour in sync. So we went from town to town with anything logical, with hotels in between, or even a bus in between. No, we were in a car going, literally coming back from Birmingham and stuff to London, and then going down to Torquay and stuff. It was like zigzagging across. So really long hours, really long, But it was really exciting. I mean, it was a lot of people who were the first, I suppose, in France you'd call them the grognards, the first fans, the first diehard fans, loved it. And a lot of people criticized. I mean, Nick Kent of the New Music Press at the time said at the Hammersmith Odeon support gig of Blue Oyster Cult, he said it's the best, worst band in the world. And of course, people who knew Nick Kent knew that he used to champion a band, and as soon as it became at all famous, he'd then shoot it down in flames. Because one of those, right?
Yeah.
Which, of course, is a way of selling press again. You know, you've got to understand the way it works. You know, it's the way journalists do. That they become the champion of a band. I discovered the band, and of course, as soon as the band starts to escape them and become famous, then they shoot them down in flames because they become sold out. You know, all this crap.
Of course.
So that's the way journalism works, and did then. And Lemmy in Hawkwind and in Motörhead was always wonderful at coming up with a phrase like, you know, we're going to be the dirtiest band in the world, or if Motörhead moved in next door to the grass would die. And of course that came from, it was a hot summer and Lemmy and I were leaning out the window at Irene's, and he noticed that the grass next door was dead because there'd been no water for a while.
Yeah.
You know, so it came from that, you know. Or Eat the Rich was written on Bishop's Bridge, which was a bridge going over the railway to Paddington, and Eat the Rich was written on that.
Oh, right.
No Sleep to Hammersmith came from Irene, because Irene by that time, after I left, kicked out, slashed. My turn.
We can talk about that in a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, my turn. He had his turn. I have my turn. But yeah, I mean, she was writing the road books for the tours, and she noticed that it was like 4 days from Hammersmith, and she just wrote in "No Sleep Till Hammersmith."
Yeah,
and
so
that's
funny.
where "No Sleep Till Hammersmith" comes from. So a lot of these expressions come, well, like what was it? Hope I don't want to live forever, right? Out of Ace of Spades, right?
Yeah.
And that came from me and Irene, that we'd seen Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and at the end of the film, there's this kind of quip between them where they're about to leap off the precipice, and we adopted it, Irene and I. Every time we were going to do something really stupid, like take too much acid and stuff, we'd look at each other in the eye and say, "Do you want to live forever?" And I go, "No, I don't live forever." And that's where that came from, because Lemmy heard us say that. So there's all sorts of little bits. Lemmy was like Bowie, like all of songwriters, are constantly looking out for a phrase, whether it be for the press or whether it be for a song. So I'm not. It's not a criticism. It's he just had this wonderful knack of picking up phrases, and of course he read all the time. He was a real bookworm, and he read not just war books, but he also read philosophy. He was a real intellectual. That might surprise a lot of people because of his reputation as being a lad on the road and stuff. But he read all the time. He always had a book on the go.
Yeah.
He always had a newspaper rolled up in his back pocket with his jeans and stuff. It was, you know.
No, absolutely. I think, you know, a lot of people are aware of that, but maybe, you know, people who are not so familiar with the band might be quite shocked to hear that. But yeah, you know, but I'd like to think most of the people listening to this, or at least, you know, there's a lot of Motörhead fans, I guess, that listen to this show. But there's definitely a few people that maybe not as well. So I'm sure there's lots of information here that is new to them, which is hopefully interesting. Like, I can't believe how much time we've already taken, but I've got, you know, another 30 minutes in me if you're happy to.
I'm more than happy, man.
That's great.
I warned you. I mean,
I know.
I've done loads and loads of interviews for the book, because the book came out in France last April, and I've done 40 events in 25 towns since April.
Wow.
And that's book signing and also playing with local bands, which I love to do. So I've got a pickup band in Normandy, a pickup band in Brittany, a pickup band down the south of France, a pickup band in Strasbourg that I play with.
Wow.
And it's a combination of doing a book signing and playing in a band. And I just play 4 or 5 Motörhead songs at the end of their set. And it works really well. So we get shitloads of radio, shitloads of TV, and loads of press, which is great for the book. You know,
yeah.
So and I've got another 10 lined up. And I went to Oslo, which was the first time I met Mickey D. that I was invited for the 50th anniversary in Oslo.
That was last year, right? Obviously. So I did see the photos of that come up.
Oh, it's great.
I'm not sure why my old man wasn't there. Maybe we were out. We might have been touring ourselves. I'm not sure. But yeah, I bet that was amazing. And yeah, Mickey's a fun guy. He's been on the show. It was quite a while back now. So, I would love to invite him back on maybe for part 2. So, because a lot has happened since then. I know he had his health scare, and I heard you know.
Yeah, he told me about that.
Yes, I don't want to talk about that here because I'm not sure how much is private and what's public knowledge.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, it'd be good to talk about that. But well, I really want to push your book to anyone that isn't aware of it, because you've mentioned it a few times in passing. So at the moment, it's available in French and Spanish. What I found fascinating is that you grew up speaking French, or you learned French in school, or went to a French-speaking school. Is that right?
I went to the French Lycée in London.
That's it.
Which is in South Kent, which is theoretically a very posh school, but it wasn't at the time in the 50s and 60s.
Right.
It was full of people who were there for maybe 6 months or a year before their parents were moved on to another town. And so it was the advantage of that school. And at the beginning, I mean, when I was born, we had a bit of money because my father managed to have a bit of success in his tiny company. And then the company ran out of money. It kind of went down the tube. Okay. And so but they managed to keep us in the French Lycée, which is a great education. Being brought up with people from all over the world in the same class was already an amazing education.
I can imagine.
Because you have a different look, you have a different attitude towards people in general, because, everywhere I've worked in the world, including Malaysia and Qatar, and also it's the same percentage of idiots and cunts all over the world, and same same amount of people that you can really get on with as well. And in between the two, you've got this massive wedge of interesting people that maybe you don't want to hang out with forever, but interesting, nice people.
Yeah.
So so that was interesting. And the reason I got sent there was because my mother was on this base, Tempsford. She was a commandant at the age of 23 on the base, a commandant of the WAF side, the Women's Air Force side, operational, actually putting the missions on the mission board, and so she got very close to a lot of the French secret agents going out to France, and hence I knew a lot about that. And even at the age of 9 or 10, I knew about the Gestapo and torture and all this stuff. And I can remember being absolutely outraged when I heard about Pétain, who was the guy who signed the armistice with the Germans and collaborated with the Germans. And I was outraged. I said, came back from school and said, listen, this is outrageous. I'm at a French school. How do you put me in the French school, given the collaboration? And she just took me by the hand and up to their bedroom and took me to the window and said, look, you see that car over there? Grandmother's in the back seat with the Gestapo. What do we do? And left me with it. And for 3 nights, I remember having nightmares about imagining my grandmother being tortured in front of us.
Oh, my God.
And that's the thing that people miss in Britain, which was, yes, we had the Blitz all over Britain in 1940. At the end of the war, we had the V1s and the V2s. So we had enormous amounts of dead and stuff. And, the merchant seamen, I can go into the whole history of the Second World War. But we weren't occupied. We didn't have people going Gestapo at the door.
Yeah.
I mean, where I live in Paris, 700 children went to Auschwitz. So I mean, this is the big difference one misses.
Yeah.
And of course, most people just needed to survive. And at the time, there was so much propaganda. It looked like it was going to be a 1,000-year Reich. It was going to be 1,000 years of this domination. And so people had to survive. People had to get on with it. So it plays into that one where, so that's why I was sent to the French Lycée. My father was obsessed by French culture, French food and stuff, which I love too.
I imagine you do if you've living there for so long.
Well, it's pretty good here, and also I can get all over Europe by train, which means I don't have to be at the airport 2 hours early. I just need to be 20 minutes before the train. And south of France is 3 hours. It's 3 hours to Amsterdam, 2.25 hours to central London from where I am. So it's a
no-brainer, really, isn't it?
It's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure life is lovely there. So the book is called Motörhead In and Out. You want to?
Yep.
You've written an English version. You're waiting for a publisher. If anyone is listening to this that can help, I'm sure you could send.
That would be great. Yeah.
Send Lucas a message. Obviously, like I was thinking this. Have you thought about like a self-publish?
I have, but in France, I was lucky enough to get a really big publisher,
right?
With with real good promotion and a great team around me. Great people looking after the bookshops. Yeah. Great people looking after the press and stuff, and social media. So I've been lucky on that. It's my third publisher. The first one, it was during COVID, and the guy who wanted to sign it pulled out because he'd gone to hospital and was in hospital for 6 weeks. So that didn't happen. The second one, it turned out I had an agent at the time, and I called up the agent. I said, "Listen, this lot have pulled out because of COVID, but there's a guy who'd been chasing me for 6 weeks, but I'm sure it's only a little publisher," which at the time didn't interest me. I thought, well, I'm not going to work for 6 years to have it, sell 1,000 copies, which a lot of the books do.
Yeah.
And I just thought, no, I can't do that. Not that I'm money obsessed at all, but just, got to try and get some money in as well.
Of course.
To live, And so my agent said, well, what's he called? And I told him the name. He said, well, he used to be the head of the detective novel section in a really big publisher called Gallimard. And then he went to a new publishing house to be the head of the publishing section, the detective section. And I immediately thought of Maigret or some kind of boring detective thing who would never get the idea of what I wanted to do. And he sent me a photo of the guy. He's got long grey hair and a leather jacket, and a Motörhead T-shirt. I thought, this is too good.
Yeah.
And so that fell in, and he organised a great deal with his new publisher. So I got a really, really good publishing deal, and he didn't want to read anything. And I'd sent him 5 chapters about me and 5 chapters about Motörhead to show that it wasn't just about Motörhead; it was also about my life in the other bands I've been in before Motörhead, after Motörhead, the punk bands, and all that stuff. And so finally I went to the publisher with the full manuscript, and on this long table, at the other end of the table, there's 150 pages, and this end of the table is 100 pages. I said, "What's that?" Pointing to the 150 pages. He said, "Well, that's not for the book." I said, "What's this?" And he said, "That's Motörhead. The book needs to be just about Motörhead." I just walked out. So having had the advance and stuff, it was very awkward. So I went through about 10 months without a publisher. And then by accident got introduced to another publisher who lapped it up and went, "Yeah, this is we get it." And I said, "You do realise this is it's about me. There'll be maybe a third of the book is about Motörhead, intense Motörhead, of course, and after Motörhead, there's all the time that Lemmy and I spent together as well when I'm in other bands, when I'm producing other bands and stuff. So he's still very present in the book, but it's not just about Motörhead." Hence Motörhead In and Out, amongst other adventures in a exuberant life.
That was the longer title, which I thought was fantastic, actually. I don't know what that translates to in French, but I bet it sounds really cool.
Exactly the same thing.
Okay.
But so it's an interesting thing, because when I came back from seeing Lem for the last time at the Zenith, I sat on my bed and it was really emotional because I hadn't seen him for so long, and it brought back all the memories because we'd spent 2.5 hours literally as we had been in those first nights. And I sat on the bed really emotional and not feeling sad, but just instinctively I knew it was the last time I was ever going to see him. When I put him on the bus, I just knew that was it. The last time I was going to see him. And suddenly I was literally, it was like I had holograms coming up from my feet going through the skylight, which is above my head. You can just about see there.
Yeah.
And that's my bed up there. And it was holograms of memories in full color, in 3D, with everything was there. All the detail was there. And I started writing it from the inside subjectively. And it's just the way it came out. So a lot of the journalists, some of the big journalists here have said, listen, we've never read anything like it. And I'm not saying it out of me, or arrogance in any way, because when I'd finished it, I realized I'd taken a massive risk, that most autobiographies are not written like this at all. They're written like a journalist is looking in on and pointing at what's happening, rather than I insert you, Dane, inside my head, behind my eyes, with all my sensations, to live what I lived out my brains as well. And there's chapters where I literally, it started because a girl walked past me wearing Chanel No. 5, which is my mother's perfume. And suddenly I was 7 years old, looking at my mother in a ballroom gown with my father standing behind her in a dicky bow and stuff. And I could see the sofa, the two sofas, and the little Bakelite TV in the corner, these big windows that are small. And suddenly it was all there, and I could see the player's senior service packet with the dog ends, and the smell of it all came back. And so I literally, for instance, for scenes in squats, because Lemmy and I used to go to squats to buy speed.
Right.
And so I found the smell of damp, right? I found patchouli oil, and I found male cat's piss, which is a really strong ammoniac, and I mixed them together and literally smelt that to get back into and I managed to get back into the hologram of that story in the squat.
What?
Right.
Oh
So it's very cinematographic. It's all the descriptions. And what's weird about it is that my little car, the Renault van, the fridge, became a kind of character in the book, because it was such a central part to my life.
Yeah.
Hammersmith Odeon, the Marquee, the Red Cow, all these gigs kind of took on a form as characters in the book. Because when I went to Hammersmith Odeon to see the Beatles, Stones, Chuck Berry, all that, I could remember it all from the audience's perspective when I was a kid. And when finally we did play Hammersmith Odeon, and as we were coming down the long steps down, you played Hammersmith, right?
Once, actually, yeah, once.
Right, so you remember the long staircase down from the dressing rooms?
Yeah.
As I was walking down that long staircase, I had all these flashbacks of like Tina Turner, Chuck Berry, all the bands I'd seen on that stage.
Wow.
And the same when we played the Roundhouse. I could remember all the times I'd been to the Roundhouse to see Hawkwind or Pink Fairies, all these other bands. So it was these flashbacks. Also with Facebook, again, thanks to Facebook, lots of people on Facebook said, I was at that gig. And so I literally went on private messenger and started interviewing kids. Kids, they're now grown up, but they were 15 or 16 at the time. And they described how they came in their mate who worked for a butcher's van, and all crammed in the back of a butcher's van, coming into Hammersmith Odeon and seeing all the choppers with the Hells Angels outside, and then being nervous to get in, and another pair of fans, the Appleby brothers in Birmingham for Birmingham Barbarellas. They described how they got there. So suddenly I was getting different camera angles, if you like.
Yeah.
I was getting the kids as they're walking in at the same time as we're coming down the stairs to go on stage. Those sorts of things which are used as ways of I don't know. It's the way it came out. It was. I wanted to have a kind of fan's eye view at the same as on stage. The other thing I realised is that in all the books I've read, whether it's be Life for Keith Richards or Chrissy Hines' Reckless, which I would really highly recommend, or Patti Smith's Just Kids, all these books, nobody described what it was like to be playing on stage.
No.
So I described what you and I know, Dane.
Yeah.
What it is to be thumping away on your skins and seeing the backs of the band in front of you, and then the crowd in front of them, and that sensation. And I realized nobody described it. I thought, fuck it, I can remember that really well. That was part of my life.
And that's quite a unique. Yeah, it's a unique experience that only a small percentage of us have experienced.
That's right.
So like we take it for granted, maybe, or I do, but yeah, I do know a lot of our listeners and people who follow me and stuff. When I upload footage of a drum cam, I call it.
Yeah.
And they love that because they don't get to see that side of things at
They
all.
get to see what it feels like to be on stage.
And
Exactly.
I actually record videos now with my in-ear monitors directly into my camera, so they get to hear what I'm hearing as well. So
That's great.
I've got a lot of footage like that. I do want to put a lot more of that out there. I've got a hard drive full of this stuff, but yeah, like to me, watching a whole gig like that is boring to me. But I think for someone that doesn't do that, every month, every week or whatever, it is quite a fascinating thing to watch and listen to. So no, I totally get that. And I really, especially after speaking to you now, I can't wait to get my hands on an English copy. But one of the quotes that I saw that must have come from the press, I'm not sure if this has been translated from French, but I thought I picked this one out because it made me really want to read it. A fascinating look back at the London rock scene of the 70s. I presume you talk about the 60s as well. From the Beatles to Jimi Hendrix, from Lemmy to the birth of Motörhead. This is a rare account of an electric and legendary era in rock with a touch of Dickens about it. And I thought,
that blew me away. I tell you, that blew me away because that particular interview, he interviewed me, and it was a trick question. He kind of started off by, how come you remember so much detail? Which, in brackets, you can remember the old saying, if you can remember it, you weren't there.
Oh,
but
right.
the thing about it was this thing of interviewing so many people and spending so much time on olfactory, and also some chapters I played the same album for like 3 weeks, solid,
just to get the memories,
just completely in there. And that's how I got back into it. And it's I don't know if you know Proust the philosopher. It was a principle of the Madeleine, which is a little cake that grandmothers used to make in France.
Okay.
And when you taste that cake when you're an adult, you flash back to the first time your grandmother made that cake. So it's all that kind of sound, taste, visuals, and smell.
Yeah.
Which means you can really get back into those memories. They're like, I think memory capsules is probably the best way of describing it. Where if you can get in there, you literally, I mean, I managed to, on the whole book, I managed to get into it so much that I was there. I was back there. And I could remember all the subjects that Lemmy and I, for instance, talked about. And I retranscribed what we were talking about as conversations, which I did the best I could to make it feel like we're talking. But I can remember all the subjects we talked about, which was the Second World War, which was horses, which was women, was, the music, all the tracks we thought we wanted to play in Motörhead at the beginning, all that stuff, and so I could remember all the subjects we talk about, not necessarily what the phrases. A lot of the phrases I could remember that I actually put in there. But so it was a kind of reconstruction of the memory, if that makes sense.
No, I get that.
And that's what people seem to be picking up on more than anything else. And also, it's Notting Hill Gate at the time probably had the highest density of musicians in the world in that square mile of Notting Hill Gate.
Wow.
Ladbroke Grove. And I mean, Pink Floyd played their first gig there, obviously in Hawkwind and Motörhead. But after I left Motörhead, the Clash, Mickey Jones, all went to the same pub. Billy Idol, same pub. The Damned, Brian James, bless his cotton socks, who's now passed, was a close mate of mine. We were all in the same pub. So the Stranglers were there. Virgin Records were there. Island Records were there. All of these in this same square mile of Notting Hill Gate. So it was, again, we didn't think it was exceptional just because you're living it.
Yes, it was normal to you. That was just what it was like there. Yeah,
and there's no way of looking back on it.
No.
And all the shops, and the colours and what people wore was so much more adventurous than it is now.
Yeah.
People now go to Topshop or whatever they do, or we're all wearing jeans. But at the time, people would buy Granny's fur coat and wear that.
Yeah,
and silly hats, and velvet clothes. It was an amazing period to be living in as growing up and coming of age in that period. So the 60s and 70s, I don't believe there's ever been anything like it. There probably would never be anything like it again.
No, I
Because there's just
agree with
so
you.
many bands, so many films, so many fashion, so many things that were going on, and of course the race riots in Notting Hill as well, where the Clash's I can't remember what it's called now. There's a track that the Clash wrote about that, White Riot, I think it is. Which is all based on the Notting Hill Carnival, where the police horses charged the crowd,
Right.
And the Jamaican kids were had got all these marbles, and they rolled them under the horses' hooves, and the horses went down. So it was also quite a violent time.
Yeah, I can't imagine that happening today. I know other things do happen, mind, but that's like when I look back at that era, just from a musical perspective, it always seems to be, that's one of the best albums I've ever heard, or that, in terms of production and songwriting and creativity, it does seem to be definitely a special time. And I feel like, even though, lots of great music has been written since I was born, when I compare it, it stands the test of time more than the bands I grew up listening to from the 90s and 2000s and
absolutely. And I saw you playing along to tracks recently, right? On your which I used to love to do, and it's a challenge. But when I started playing at the age of 9, so in '62, it's the beginnings of recording as we know it.
Yeah,
and then
of course.
and then suddenly Rubber Soul and came in, and Revolver and Sergeant Pepper's, and suddenly everything's changing. So that's what made me fascinated by recording, and that's how I started producing.
Yeah,
because after Motörhead, I was in a band called White Lightning after the Warsaw Pakt, which is a great band. I love the Warsaw Pakt.
I did watch a video of the Warsaw Pakt this afternoon, and I was like, I could get into this. It was just kind of like, it had that attitude about it. But it was only one track.
And the arrangements.
Yeah.
There's like 10 or so tracks on YouTube that you can look at.
I'll find them.
The arrangements are really finely done. And me and Andy Calhoun, I adore as a guitarist. We really crafted that, the two of us in the bunker, which was a rehearsal studio in Portobello Road in the basement. Just built out of breeze blocks, Anyway, So White Lightning was an interesting one. Carl Grossman, who I bumped into via Clive Taylor, who was in Amen Corner, and I played with him. He was my bass player. We were a rhythm section together for a while, literally just after Motörhead. And because I came out of Motörhead just quickly on that one, Speed just got the better of me. It was 18 months solid of Speed. And then the Speed that turned up at Rockfield Studios was the strongest Speed we'd ever come across. And Lemmy and Larry and also Dave Edmunds started having a competition as to who could take the most. And I became kind of autism set in. I couldn't even speak,
right.
but I could play straightforward. And because Larry had spent so much time overdubbing his guitars and stuff, I assumed that the safest and best thing I could do was to play it really straight down the line and then be able to overdub the toms and cymbals. So I assumed I was going to be able to do that, but I never got to do that. Hence.
You run out of time, basically, right? You
run out of time, and also I think they ran out of patience with me, who was on another planet, like Lemmy been on another planet,
Yeah.
Parallels, and we still had a few gigs to play, so we played a few gigs after that, after Rockfield. But that was where it started to come undone. And those chapters in the book I'm really proud of. A lot of people who read the book have said, you really expose yourself, not in old man terms, but you really expose your feelings and what you went through. Because those chapters, I spent 3 months going through hell again. And it really was going through hell in that state of out my brains on Speed. And I wanted to write it as I lived it, So again, I went through all that, and coming back out of that and managed to pull myself together as a speed junkie. After Motörhead, I was a speed junkie for a while. So it was coming out of that, and I wanted to put it in because Life of Keith Richards and stuff, and I love that book. It's a great book, but heroin is almost never mentioned.
Right.
And yet,
okay.
Keith, in many ways, is probably responsible at the time for, I don't know, millions of people taking heroin because Keith could do it. They could do it.
Yeah.
And of course, that's completely wrong because Keith, Lemmy, Ozzy all had a metabolism which is from another planet.
Well, I recently, it was the Aussie book that came out, I want to say 15 years ago, maybe. And he talks about, he had his like blood tested or whatever. He had some tests and they pretty much told him, like, you're just like an alien, essentially. We have no idea how your body has actually been able to absorb this much abuse and still functions. Or like he goes into a lot more detail. But yeah, I think there must be a tiny percentage of people like Lemmy as well, that can somehow get to the age that they get to with a life of just complete abuse.
Despite it, yeah. Well, Lemmy had his blood tested, and he said, should I give up drink? And he said, no, it'll kill you.
Yeah, I did read that actually. Yeah,
and which is what Lemmy told me as well.
Yeah.
But it's that weird thing, and I felt that somebody had to say it. Somebody had to say what you really go through.
Yeah.
And come out the other. And Breaking Bad, there's a great series, wonderful series.
Amazing.
But there's only one episode, as far as I can remember, where you see the effect of that drug. Where you see people lying around completely fucked up. And of course that's the danger of it, that they're glorifying a guy who's made a success out of being a dealer of crack cocaine or whatever it is,
crystal meth or whatever.
Crystal meth.
I'm not really that knowledgeable on all the drug terminology, but obviously watch Breaking Bad, and I guess I'm sure a lot of people watched that, and it made them curious about that particular drug. To try it, to seek it out and try it.
A, to try it, and B, this is how to make money.
Yeah, well,
Therefore, both for me are morally kind of
questionable.
So it's questionable at best, if not downright irresponsible.
Yeah,
in a way.
No, I know.
So I wanted to put that in there, and to give people hope who've been through shit, that you can fall flat on your face many, many times and keep going.
Yeah.
And the whole thing is never give up. Give people hope, because also trying things. We've all, I don't know about you, but I went through so many bands that didn't work out, but we had some wonderful bands. White Lightning was White Lightning, an amazing band. We did all our demos in the basement of Savile Row, where the Beatles did their last gig on the roof.
Oh yeah.
Apple HQ.
The one that's on Get Back, is it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow,
So we did all the demos there because we were signed to Ringo Records. Back to Ringo again.
Very cool. One of my favourites.
Me too. A creative, wonderful drummer.
Yeah.
And much maligned, but I mean, what an incredible drummer.
Mm-hmm.
And being a left-handed drummer on a right-handed kit as well. Famous for being able to start all the roles on the left hand. Which of course none of us right drummers do naturally at all.
No.
Yeah.
And when you try, you mess up.
Exactly.
I do
anyway. And then we moved to Tony Visconti's studio. Tony Visconti, Bowie producer, Mark Bolan producer, amazing producer, lovely guy, American guy. And we spent 6 weeks at Good Earth, which was his studio. And we had Carlos Sanamar come in and do sessions, the guitarist from Bowie and stuff. We had Stevie Wonder's backing vocals come in. So I managed to sneak in to the control room and sit on the sofa after I'd done my drum parts. As usual with albums, you do your drum parts in the first 2 or 3 days. In those days, we had a lot of time, maybe the first day these days. But, and I sat there for 6 weeks just watching the producer and the engineer and all their mental processes, why they chose that take and that not that take, why they chose the singer to do this again, or why they sent the guitarist in again to play that riff, and it became the riff of the song under the hook, you know?
Yeah.
So I started being fascinated by this. And it started with Warsaw Pakt, where I spent a lot of time in the studio with them. And that's how my producing started. You know, just being really obsessed by how do you craft sound. And in those days, we had enough time to actually create in the studio, as opposed to rehearsing the fuck out of it and going in and playing what you rehearsed.
Yeah.
It was much more, we'd go in and play, and then the creation would also start, which was fascinating. And then we moved from Good Earth out to Tittenhurst Park, which anybody who knows it, that was John Lennon's house. And on the Imagine clip,
Wow.
if you've seen the video of Imagine with Yoko Ono opening the shutters,
Oh, wow.
that was where it was.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
And Ringo bought the house off John Lennon when John Lennon moved to New York. So we spent a few weeks in there, and it was fascinating, you know. And the first time I walked in there, for a start, over the door, it said, "This is not here," a very John Lennon type thing.
Yeah.
And you open the door. I opened the door and it was straight into that living room, where the white living room with the white piano. And leaning against the wall was the 3/4 inch, so it's a 3/4 size Rickenbacker, the black and white one. John Lennon's was just leaning against the wall.
What?
It was just like John Lennon walked out into the park for a walk, you know. So it's
wow.
And the harmonium from Rubber Soul and stuff were in the Get Back studio and stuff like that. So is suddenly a complete circle coming back into one of my obsessions and Lemmy's obsession, which is the Beatles, of course, and all that production sort of became obsessively how I love to work, and I still produce, you know. So that was what kicked that off, I think, you know.
Yeah. Fascinating. And one thing I did want to ask you, I reached out to some of my patrons from my Patreon page saying I was going to chat to you. Have you got any questions? Because that's one thing I do.
Oh, great.
I try and offer. I am running a bit short on time, so I'm going to be fairly selective.
Yeah.
But one thing I'd kind of like to know as well, because we haven't really talked about On Parole at all, really. Only that you recorded it. And then, unfortunately, later on, the filthy Animal Tailor overdubbed some of the songs. But regards to that process, you were strapped for time by the sound of it. But this is one from Gareth Richards. So, hi, Gareth. Thanks for this question.
Hi, Gareth.
During those early Motörhead recording sessions, how much song arrangement was completed before entering the studio? And another question was, what are your fondest memories of the early Motörhead gigs that you played?
Okay, on the studio, an interesting one, because until the 2020 remastered version, which is the only one which I really love, because the first version that came out in 1979 was mixed by a guy called Fritz Fry,
right,
who was in a band called the Four Pennies, which is a little pop band, and he just happened to live around the corner from the studio.
Right.
Therefore, he became the second producer of the album. And the mix for me is mud. It's an awful mix. The studio was set up, if you imagine a place, I don't know, not a very big studio. The amps, bass and guitar amps were down one end, the kit was down the other. No separation, no screens.
Right, okay. So
a very important detail.
Yeah.
And Dave Edmonds, who was the producer, I adore Dave Edmonds' production. He'd set up three overheads, Neumann's, three pairs of overheads going down the studio to pick up the ambient sound. And therefore, it was impossible to wipe anybody's tracks that went down.
Because,
therefore, it was impossible to wipe the drums. And it's only on the new 2020 version where Warner Brothers wanted me to write the liner notes for the album, which I was in the middle of the book, so that was easy. 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, and so I wrote all the liner notes for it of the beginnings of Motörhead and stuff. What they'd written was crap. It was more about Hawkwind than about Motörhead, and there was nothing about the beginning, which makes sense because nobody really wrote about the beginning.
Yeah.
And even in White Line Fever, it's kind of it's like a half a page and that's it. It's gone. You know.
Yeah, I remember reading that. Yeah.
So I asked Warner's to send me the masters of what they remastered, and lo and behold, I'm listening to it and I hear, wait a minute, I can hear my snare drum. Because my snare drum, I don't know about yours, but I didn't have a dry snare drum. I didn't have all the dampers on. I had a sort of, it went clack.
Yeah,
it had
a little
that
bit of ring on it. Yeah,
little bit of ring on it, which Dave Evans loved because it meant that he could use that ring to use the drums a little less, the snare drum a little less loud, and make the sound of the guitars and bass guitar much louder. Because the snare drum cut through the mix because of the ring. And therefore I could hear this on all the tracks. And on top of that was Filthy's drum, which was snare drum, which was really dry. It was a clack, you know, as opposed to clack, right? So on the On Parole new remaster version, you can hear both drummers.
Wow,
that's
unique.
And if you look at the back of it, you can see I'm now credited on loads more tracks than just Lost Johnny.
Oh, great!
So it's all credited as it should have been credited at the beginning.
Do you know then if I go to Spotify, and I'm one of these people that unfortunately I don't buy much records these days, is that the versions on Spotify the ones you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a black and red album.
Black and okay, so because obviously
the black and red came out in 2020.
Okay,
on Warner's.
Okay,
the original was on United Artists.
So if anyone wants to search for that version,
yeah, exactly. It's a double album with a lot of outtakes and stuff. It's a really interesting album.
Oh, cool.
And it sounds brilliant. The guitar sounds and all the drum sounds like it did with Dave Evans behind the controls, not Fritz Fry. And
interesting.
I believe, I'm sticking my neck out here, I believe Lemmy would have loved it.
Yeah.
And he hated the first version like I hated the first version. I was very proud that the album came out originally anyway, because at least it meant there was some record of what had happened at the beginning.
Yeah, you know? I guess.
You know, so I was proud, and also I was very proud that the band started to take off, because the year after I left, it was a really difficult year. I mean, Filthy broke his neck almost immediately, and so that cancelled a few gigs. And, yeah, and it was just like a real mishmash. And Eddie was a bit difficult, and it was very, very difficult. It was a breech birth at the beginning, but I was just so chuffed for Lemmy, and I told him so loads of times that I was just so chuffed that lots of people ask me, well, don't you feel jealous or embittered by the fact that the band took off after you? And I'm going, like Pete Best has often talked about. I went, no, but that's not my character. Just like Lemmy, I don't fester like that.
Yeah,
my whole life has been moving forward. All that matters to me, even now at 72, is moving forward and doing stuff. That's all that matters to me.
That's incredible.
I've kept my child alive, my childlike fascination with life. I live with passion. I love, I'm very passionate.
You can tell, just speaking to you now, and I listened to a few of the other interviews you did. There's a really in-depth one. I'll give him a shout out now. It's the Stodcast. That goes into a little bit more maybe than we have here for anyone that is interested. Different parts of your history, more about the other bands that we didn't really get to talk about on that. But that's a really good one, and that's
good. Yeah, I enjoyed that one thoroughly. Yeah.
So Callum Stodds, I've been on the show as well. So shout out to him. But just before we finish here, this is a question that I ask all of my guests. So if you could create your own dream band with yourself on drums, what musicians would you have playing the other instruments, dead or alive? I normally say you can't have people that you've played in bands with. It's difficult for you because you've played in so many bands, but if you could literally create your own dream band.
Wow, that's a great question, and it's Gareth. just quickly, maybe I should answer Gareth's other questions.
Oh yeah, of course. Sorry. Yes, please. Sorry.
No problem. I just don't want to disrespect those questions because they were two really great questions.
Yeah.
On the gigs, it was dangerous. It was loud. I mean, incredibly loud. It was literally the loudest thing that anybody had ever heard. And part of the interesting thing was that the monitor engineers couldn't keep up with it. Couldn't keep up with the volume, the sheer volume of it.
I don't think they ever could, from my experience.
That's right.
And from what I've heard.
But to such an extent that Lemmy couldn't hear himself properly and he had to start shouting, which became his way of singing. He kind of broke his voice. Because if you hear early Lem recordings on Hawkwind and stuff, you can hear him, in inverted commas, singing as opposed to bellowing. And I loved his early voice, which was kind of a mixture of John Lennon and Elvis Costello or something, who I also adore. Who would I? So those early gigs were literally going down the edge of a razor blade. It was very dangerous, and it was very exciting. The Hammersmith Odeon gig was a horrendous nightmare. That's one of the things that I'll remember all my life, because Blue Oyster Cult sabotaged our sound on stage. They sabotaged the mixes, and we had no sound check, so we didn't know what we were walking into. And they put me on a drum riser, which was too small for my drum kit, and therefore the cymbal was literally too close to me. So the blood was running out of my hand and stuff. It was a nightmare of a gig, and we couldn't hear each other. We're only a three-piece. Mixing a three-piece in the monitors is one of the simplest things you can do in the world. Two vocals, guitar, bass, drums. Yeah. Should be simple, right? Yeah. But no, they sabotaged it, and Lemmy and Larry were outraged by it, because British bands never did that to their support bands. No. And Blue Oyster Cult, for whatever reason, thought we were live and dangerous, and we were, But it's a real mixed bag, because after the gig, everyone was kind of ashamed and pissed off about it. But the diehard fans loved that gig. And there are two bootlegs that exist of the gigs, which is the Roundhouse gig, which is the first gig, and the Blue Oyster Cult, the support gig. The sound is awful because of the way it was recorded. Yeah. But you can hear the dynamics of the band, and it's like one of my main drummers obsessively was Keith Moon. So it's a mixture of Ainsley Dunbar, Keith Moon, whatever. It's that kind of drumming, a lot of toms, a lot of rolling around the kit and stuff, and not just a simple boom chack, Charlie or Ringo style, Yeah. So it was interesting one, and those early gigs that's where we got the early fans, where the people who got it really got it. And of course, United Artists, the record company, didn't understand what they were listening to at all, bless them, because they were expecting, having signed one member from Hawkwind, one member from Pink Fairies, the logical idea would be a progressive rock band like Pink Fairies and Hawkwind were. And of course, we were nothing like that, because Lemmy wanted to have something short, sharp shock treatment, and not giving the audience enough time to recover and straight into the next number. So the idea was to nail them to the back wall with the volume, and then just relentlessly take no prisoners was the approach, And it worked. And it worked, and it worked really well. And it was keep saying exciting. You have no idea how exciting it was. It really was, and it was outrageous. Also, the thing that as we went around the country, bit by bit, we could see the image appearing. What sounds weird is that nobody used to wear blue jeans and leather jackets in those days, apart from bikers. And suddenly they started appearing in the crowd. Bullet belts started appearing in the crowd. Mirror shades, which was Lemmy and Larry's thing for a while, started appearing in the crowd. Various bits of regalia started appearing on leather jackets. The image of the band was also a thing that carried it. So is the sound, the volume, the image, and of course the attitude. And it's a real, we're here, fuck you if you can't take it, we're here to stay. And of course that was the whole thing that carried Motörhead all the way through for however many 40 years or whatever. So it's an interesting. So that kind of, I hope that replies to you, Gareth. Great two questions.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth.
Then on to your next thought. I'm struggling. Who would be my ideal band if I was playing in the band, right?
Yeah, you'd be the drummer.
I'd be the drummer. So I'd probably say Phil Lynott on bass. I love
good choice.
Phil Lynott of Thin Lizzy. On guitars, who would I think of in guitars? I'd be tempted, a really dangerous one, Adrian Belew.
I don't know who that is, sorry.
Oh, Adrian Belew, look him up. An incredible guitarist. He played a lot with various bits and pieces, a bit of Talking Heads, stuff like that.
Okay.
And a really inventive, I suppose, Robert Fripp, but Robert Fripp is much more organized. I loved Adrian Belew, and of course Mick Ronson.
Oh,
Mick
wow.
Ronson.
Yeah.
Such a melodic player, and that album Pin-Ups, which Lemmy used to hate at the beginning because I had it in the car and used to play it. And
really?
The first time I put it on, I set it up so that "Don't Bring Me Down" was on the thing, and he just said, "Oh, what a great version of this track, fucking great!" And then he recognised Bowie's voice, and I hate it.
Really? And then
at the beginning, Lemmy couldn't take Bowie, the fact that Bowie changed all the time, a changeling.
Okay, fair enough.
And he had difficulty with the makeup and stuff. But years later, I mean, he did Heroes, right?
Yeah, of course. That was the last song they recorded.
Which I love that version.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a great version. Yeah. And of course, he came full circle on that one. And as I often say, only idiots don't change their minds. So I'd say that. So that's bass and guitars, vocals. Wow, vocals. Who would I have on vocals? Maybe Dave Grohl, Foo Fighters,
cool.
Something like that.
Bit more modern.
I can see that.
Cool. Well, he's got a unique style of singing and an instantly recognizable voice, isn't he? So that's
I love his voice. I think Dave Grohl's wonderful. Yeah. On guitars, obviously Mick Ronson, but can you imagine Mick Ronson and Wayne Kramer?
Sounds good to me. I like these. I've had some wild combinations, so I think anything, be as creative as you can. I think that's the idea of the question, really. And so you don't have a lot of time to think about it.
That's right. But off the top of my head, that's the sort of thing I'd probably go for. And playing a new version of not necessarily covers, but new written songs, especially, but in the style of those R&B bands of the 60s with a lot more grunge on it.
Nice.
I love Soundgarden, Black Hole Sun, stuff like
I love all that stuff. Yeah.
And I got to hang out with them years later and stuff, and they're an amazing band and very, very bright. Yeah. Bright as a fucking button, really intelligent band.
You can tell by the music they've written. They were one of my favorites. I discovered them a bit late in life, unfortunately, but they're incredible. But yeah, Lucas, thank you so much for your time. This has been incredible. We could probably do another hour, but it's not going to happen. Sorry if you're listening, but no, I really appreciate you taking the time. And I know we've talked about it for months, and I'm sure there's been a lot of great stories and lots of things the listeners and watchers have found interesting. So we look out for the English version of the book when it comes out.
I hope it's really soon, because
I hope so.
I'm sure it will be soon. Somebody's going to pick up some, because it's not just about mode, it's about the whole period and also the way it's written. I'm sorry to repeat myself, but this is something that really I felt was a dangerous way of doing it, and because it was risky and dangerous, I thought, this is what I want to do. But Dane, thank you so much. It's been great interview. Really, real pleasure, man. And
you too.
To everybody who's listening and watching, just lots of love to you all. Never give up. He who dares wins. Please take risks, because it's only by taking risks that you get anywhere. And please just be yourselves as much as possible. Make yourself into your own little work of art, because it's the only mind and body you're ever going to have. You might as well make the most of it. And the only thing which every living thing on earth has in common is that we are born and we die, and the rest of the voyage in between. So have fun on the voyage And even when things are up and down, believe me, I've been up and down so many times you wouldn't imagine. Just never give up. Just know that things are going to get better, and they always do in some way, shape, or form. And if they don't, well, you've had whatever life you've had, so you might as well make the most of it while you can.
Well, that's fantastic advice. What a way to end. Literally the most perfect end of a podcast ever. So thank you, Lucas Fox, and have a great evening, mate. Cheers.
And keep on rocking, all of you. And love you, Dane. And take care and see you soon, man.
Yeah, hopefully.
And
cheers,
love
mate.
to the family.
Thank you.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye now.
Cheers, man.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Drum for the Song podcast. If you've enjoyed this, please consider liking the video and subscribing if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts. If you could leave me a review or comment, that would be fantastic too, as it helps other people discover this show. Please also consider sharing this with any family members or friends who might enjoy the content. You can also follow me on social media at Dane_drums or at Drum for the Song, or search for Drum for the Song on Facebook to follow the page and join the official Facebook group. If you'd like to support the podcast, you could purchase some merchandise from drumforthesong.com, or consider supporting me via Patreon from just £3 per month for additional exclusive content like bonus episodes, video calls with myself, competitions, discounts, and much more. Any additional support is always greatly appreciated, but I would like to give extra special thanks to my top tier Groove Master patrons, whose names are listed in the description below. My name is Dane Campbell, and thanks so much for watching or listening this far. If you're a drummer, don't forget to drum for the song.